For a millennium, these walls stood unbroken, an impenetrable fortress that laughed at every conqueror who dared to challenge it. But then, everything changed. One morning, the ground itself began to tremble from the roar of massive cannons. And if that wasn't insane enough, an entire naval fleet appeared where no water existed, warships gliding across solid ground as if the laws of nature had been rewritten. A tiny garrison, outnumbered 10 to 1, prepared to face an unstoppable tide of fire, steel, and ambition. Could ancient faith and raw courage hold back the future itself? Or would a visionary young sultan obliterate the old world and birth something entirely new? This wasn't just any urban settlement. Constantinople was the crown jewel of civilization. When Constantine the Great established it back in 330 AD, he created more than a capital. He forged the beating heart of the Byzantine Empire, the bridge connecting Europe to Asia. Control this single city and you controlled everything: commerce, routes, military might, political power spanning 2 continents. For generations, rulers from both the Christian and Islamic worlds fantasized about possessing it. But by the 1450s, the Byzantine Empire had withered into a ghost of its former glory, once its influence had stretched across the entire Mediterranean basin. Now, the empire had shrunk to barely more than the city walls themselves and a handful of scattered territories. Roughly 50,000 souls clung to life within its boundaries. Yet Constantinople remained powerful in ways that transcended military strength. It stood as the ultimate symbol, the final fortress of Eastern Christianity, the living legacy of Rome itself. To the ascending Ottoman Empire, this city represented something beyond mere conquest. For Sultan Mehmed II, who claimed the throne at a mere 21 years old, Constantinople wasn't just a strategic target, it was an all-consuming fixation. Mehmed believed destiny itself had written his name into prophecy, that a great Muslim leader would one day seize the city of Constantine. But this was also calculated ambition. Capturing Constantinople meant controlling the economic lifeline between East and West, transforming the Ottomans from a regional power into a genuine world-dominating force. Mehmed's preparation was meticulous. He assembled a staggering military force, somewhere between 80,000 and 100,000 warriors. Cavalry units, infantry divisions, archer battalions, and his legendary janissaries, soldiers taken as children, molded into living weapons, fanatically devoted to their sultan. But raw manpower wasn't his secret weapon, technology was. Mehmed recruited a Hungarian engineer named Orban, a genius who designed artillery that made every previous cannon look like a child's toy. His crowning achievement, the Great Bombard, a bronze nightmare stretching over 8 meters in length, launching stone projectiles weighing nearly half a ton each. These weren't just weapons, they were wall-destroying monsters capable of shattering defenses that had laughed at invaders for 1,000 years. The Byzantines, commanded by Emperor Constantine XI, could muster perhaps 7,000 to 8,000 defenders. Among them stood 2,000 Genoese mercenaries led by the battle-hardened Giovanni Giustiniani. Their hope rested on one thing: the legendary Theodosian walls, 3 massive layers of fortifications extending 6 kilometers around the city. For 10 centuries, these walls had rejected everyone. Huns, Persians, Arabs, even Crusaders, all had failed to breach them. No army in history had ever gotten through. But 1453 brought something unprecedented. The defenders now faced the thunderous fury of gunpowder and the earth-shattering power of Mehmed's artillery. The medieval world of steel and stone was about to collide headfirst with the modern age of explosives and engineering. In April 1453, the Ottoman army materialized outside the city like a vision from a nightmare. Tents spread across the landscape as far as the eye could see. The colossal cannons rolled into firing positions. The destiny of Constantinople and the future trajectory of European civilization hung in the balance. April 6, 1453, the ground around Constantinople began to vibrate. That morning, Mehmed II's forces, nearly 100,000 strong, moved into their final assault positions surrounding the walls. Canvas tents blanketed the plains. Crescent moon banners danced in the wind. The atmosphere filled with rhythmic drumbeats and battle cries that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then came the moment that changed everything. A deep rolling boom echoed across the land. The first cannon shot exploded with such force it seemed to tear the air itself. A massive stone sphere smashed into the Theodosian walls, sending clouds of pulverized stone and debris into the sky. For the first time in 1,000 years, defenders heard the terrifying sound of their impregnable walls being struck by weapons forged not from traditional materials, but from flame and explosive powder. The siege of Constantinople had officially begun. Mehmed organized his army into 3 massive divisions. The right flank, soldiers from Anatolia, what we call Turkey today. The left flank, troops drawn from the Balkans. At the center, positioned directly opposite the strongest section of fortifications, stood the Janissaries, the elite warriors trained from childhood to possess absolute loyalty to the Sultan. Behind these forces, the giant bombards were positioned. The Great Bombard, Orban's masterwork, was so monumentally huge that moving it required a team of 60 oxen. Every time it fired, the earth trembled like during a seismic event. The Ottomans also dominated the maritime theater. Mehmed's fleet, more than 100 warships, assembled outside the Golden Horn in the Sea of Marmara. But the Byzantines possessed a secret defense, a massive iron chain stretched across the harbor entrance. As long as that chain held firm, Ottoman vessels couldn't force entry and attack the city's most vulnerable defensive sections. Inside Constantinople, Emperor Constantine XI walked the battlements to inspire his outnumbered forces. Only 7,000 to 8,000 defenders faced the Ottoman avalanche. The most crucial among them were the 2,000 Genoese mercenaries under Giustiniani, whose expertise in siege defense made him irreplaceable. Wherever the combat intensified to its deadliest point, Giustiniani and his warriors would be deployed. The following days established a brutal pattern. Cannons thundered throughout daylight hours, tearing chunks from the ancient walls. During darkness, Byzantine soldiers worked frantically to repair the damage, stuffing breaches with earth, timber, and debris. Mehmed's infantry launched repeated nocturnal assaults, scaling ladders into storms of arrows, stones, and scalding oil. Wave after wave crashed against the defenses, only to be repelled with devastating casualties. But Mehmed never wavered. He believed time favored him. Each cannon blast weakened the fortifications. Each assault tested the defenders' endurance. Gradually, inexorably, the ancient fortress was being ground down. For the Byzantines, hope sparked briefly on April 20th. 3 small Christian supply vessels escorted by a large Byzantine ship attempted to penetrate the Ottoman naval blockade. In a spectacular maritime clash, these outnumbered ships somehow managed to push past dozens of Ottoman galleys and reach the Golden Horn. The city erupted in celebration. Defenders cheered from the walls. Church bells rang across Constantinople in joyous harmony, but everyone understood this was merely a temporary victory. Supplies remained limited and no relief army was marching to their rescue. By late April, the reality was undeniable. Constantinople could resist temporarily, but not indefinitely. Mehmed was already formulating his next audacious strategy, a plan that would fundamentally alter the siege's direction. By late April 1453, Mehmed faced a critical problem. His fleet couldn't break the chain blocking the Golden Horn. That iron barrier stretched across the harbor like a wall built on water. While it held, the Byzantines could keep a portion of their defenses secure. So the young sultan conceived a plan that left even his own commanders speechless. If his ships couldn't sail into the harbor, he'd transport them over the land itself. Mehmed ordered a pathway cleared over the hills of Galata, the district north of the Golden Horn. Workers laid down wooden planks, coating them with animal fat to create a slippery surface. One by one, Ottoman galleys were hauled from the water, positioned on rolling logs and dragged across the terrain by teams of oxen and hundreds of men. Drums pounded relentlessly. Soldiers shouted in unison. And the people of Constantinople watched from their walls in absolute disbelief. On the morning of April 22nd, the impossible became tangible reality. Dozens of Ottoman ships slid down into the Golden Horn, behind the chain that was supposed to keep them out. For the first time, Byzantine defenders confronted an enemy fleet inside their own harbor. Panic ripped through the city like wildfire. The Golden Horn had always represented Constantinople's vulnerable point, its walls lower and less fortified than the landward defenses. The chain had been their shield. That shield had just been circumvented. Constantine XI and Giustiniani frantically redeployed men and artillery to cover the harbor. Defenders fired from towers and ships, desperately attempting to contain the Ottoman navy. Skirmishes erupted across the water as Venetian and Genoese vessels engaged the new arrivals. But the psychological impact was catastrophic. For the first time, Constantinople's people realized they were completely encircled. No safe position existed, no gap remained in the Ottoman stranglehold. Meanwhile, Mehmed's cannons continued their merciless bombardment of the land walls. Day after relentless day, massive stone projectiles tore new openings while the Byzantines scrambled to patch them. The defenders were physically exhausted. Food grew scarce. Each night seemed to darken further than the previous one. Yet the city endured. The defenders fought with extraordinary courage, clinging to their ancient faith and hoping for divine intervention. But Mehmed was preparing something even more devastating, a final assault that would determine the empire's fate. By early May, the siege had transformed into a waking nightmare. Every single day, the giant bombards fired, their thunder reverberating across land and sea. Stone projectiles smashed into walls, creating gaps wide enough for dozens of men to pour through. and every single night defenders scrambled desperately to fill those breaches before sunrise. On the nights of May 7th and May 12th, Mehmed launched massive coordinated assaults. Thousands of Ottoman soldiers surged forward under cover of darkness. Ladders slammed against walls. Byzantines fought with everything they possessed, raining down arrows, rocks, and even boiling oil. In the flickering torchlight, shadows writhed across the battlements as men fought in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Swords clashed, spears thrust. The screams of the dying filled the darkness. At one breach, Janissaries advanced with their terrifying discipline. Shields raised, voices chanting war songs. They moved forward step by methodical step despite the devastating storm of projectiles. On the walls above, Giustiniani's mercenaries hacked and stabbed, pushing ladders back, toppling men into the darkness below. When dawn finally came, the ground was carpeted with bodies, but the city still stood. Constantinople was bleeding profusely but still breathing. Inside the walls, the population prayed without ceasing in the Hagia Sophia, the magnificent church at the city's heart. They lit candles by the thousands, sang hymns, and pleaded for divine assistance. Every rumble of the cannons shook the building's golden dome, a constant reminder that their entire world was disintegrating outside. By mid-May, Mehmed's impatience grew. He pushed his forces harder. Fresh attacks hammered the defenders almost every night. Ottoman soldiers excavated trenches, constructed ramps, and positioned smaller cannons closer to the walls, firing point-blank into the stone. The defenders, exhausted and starving, began to falter. Still, Constantine Xi refused surrender. He walked the walls daily, addressing soldiers by their names, reminding them they were the final guardians of Rome's legacy. His courage kept hope flickering alive, but everyone knew the city couldn't endure forever. The clash of fire and steel continued day after day, night after night. Constantinople was becoming a mass grave, yet its people still held on, waiting for the storm they knew was inevitable, Mehmed's final all-out assault. On the night of May 28, 1453, Constantinople fell silent. For weeks, the city had endured cannon bombardment, repeated assaults, and starvation. Now everyone knew the end had arrived. In the Hagia Sophia, thousands gathered for one final service. Greeks, Latins, soldiers, civilians all prayed together. For one night, ancient divisions were forgotten. At dawn on May 29th, the storm broke with full fury. Mehmed unleashed everything. Drums thundered, horns blared, waves of soldiers rushed forward like a human tsunami. The first assaults came from irregular troops, Ottoman volunteers sent to exhaust the defenders. They charged forward shouting, climbing ladders, but were cut down by arrows and swords. Their blood stained the moat red, but they'd accomplished their purpose. They'd tired the defenders. The second wave followed quickly, regular troops from Anatolia and the Balkans. They pressed harder, filling the breaches with their dead as they attempted to climb. Arrows blackened the sky. Rocks crashed down. The defenders fought like men who knew this was their last stand. Then came the third wave, the Janissaries. Mehmed's elite, his pride and joy. They marched forward initially in eerie silence, shields raised, their discipline chilling to witness. When they reached the breaches, they roared as one and surged upward like a flood that couldn't be stopped. The battle descended into pure chaos. Swords clashed, shields shattered, men grappled hand-to-hand on the walls themselves. Then disaster struck. Giustiniani was gravely wounded, carried away bleeding heavily. His loss shattered the defenders' morale like a hammer hitting glass. At a section of wall known as the Gunpowder Gate, a small postern door had been left unsecured. Ottoman soldiers discovered it and forced their way inside. Shortly after, a larger breach opened under relentless cannon fire. Janissaries poured into the city like water through a broken dam. Realizing the walls were lost, Emperor Constantine Xi tore off his imperial regalia and fought as a common soldier. Sword in hand, he led his men into the melee. Witnesses later reported his final words, "The city is lost, but I refuse to live any longer as emperor." Surrounded by enemies, he vanished into the press of battle, never to be seen again. By mid-morning, the defenders were completely overwhelmed. Ottoman banners rose above the towers. Soldiers swarmed through the streets. The gates were thrown wide open, and Mehmed's army flooded into Constantinople. After more than 1,000 years, the city had fallen. The Byzantine Empire had ceased to exist. As the sun climbed higher on May 29, 1453, the crescent moon banners flew above Constantinople. The magnificent city, once the jewel of the Christian East, had been conquered. For 3 days, the Ottomans claimed their prize according to the customs of conquest. Churches, palaces, homes, all were looted. The cries of the vanquished echoed through the streets. Finally, Sultan Mehmed II entered the city. Riding through the gates, he gazed at the battle-scarred ruins and the mighty Hagia Sophia rising above everything. He dismounted, entered the great church, and ordered its conversion into a mosque. In that single moment, Mehmed earned his historical title, Mehmed the Conqueror. For the Ottomans, it was a triumph beyond calculation. Constantinople became their new capital, later known as Istanbul, the beating heart of an empire that would endure for centuries. From this center, the Ottomans would expand deep into Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. For the Christian world, it was catastrophe. The Byzantine Empire, the final remnant of Rome, was erased forever. Across Europe, shock waves rippled. If Constantinople could fall, what city was truly safe? Fear spread through Christendom and calls for new crusades echoed, though they came far too late. Yet from this tragedy emerged transformation. Constantinople's fall severed the trade routes to the east, forcing Europeans to seek new maritime paths. Within decades, explorers like Columbus and Vasco da Gama would sail into the unknown, launching the Age of Discovery. Scholars fleeing the fallen city carried ancient manuscripts to Italy, fueling the Renaissance. Thus, May 29, 1453 marked not only Constantinople's end, but the conclusion of the Middle Ages themselves. A new world was being born, shaped by gunpowder, exploration, and empires rising from the ashes of the old. So what do you think? Could Constantinople have survived if they'd had just a few more defenders? Or was this the inevitable collision between the old world and the new? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more epic historical battles where everything hung by a thread, hit that subscribe button, because history's greatest moments are just getting started.